Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that while Donald Trump was calling the US-Canada trade deal irrelevant and threatening our economy with devastating tariffs, Canadian diplomats were already on a plane to Beijing preparing to sign agreements with the world's second largest economy that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in North America? And ask yourself this: is it possible that what appears to be a desperate reaction to American bullying is actually a strategic masterstroke that has been months, perhaps years in the making? On January 13th, just days ago, Donald Trump stood in a Michigan Ford plant and declared that the USMCA trade agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada was irrelevant. He said, and I quote, "We don't need cars made in Canada. We don't need cars made in Mexico." The message was clear: submit to our demands or we will cut you off. Yesterday, January 15th, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stood in Beijing's Great Hall of the People and signed 8 separate agreements with China, covering energy, investment, technology, and trade worth billions of dollars. The timing appears coincidental. The optics suggest panic. But when you examine the timeline, the preparation, and the strategic positioning, a very different reality emerges. This was not a reaction. This was a revelation. Canada has been building an insurance policy against American economic aggression for months. And the moment Trump showed his hand, we played ours. The headline you need to understand today is this: Canada just executed one of the most brilliant strategic pivots in modern trade history. And the fury emanating from Washington right now is not the anger of strength. It is the panic of a bully who just realized he has no leverage. But before we examine exactly how this checkmate unfolded, if you appreciate analysis that goes beyond the headlines to reveal what's actually happening in Canadian geopolitics, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. It helps us continue bringing you these insights every single day. To understand why this China pivot is so devastating to American strategy, we must first understand the assumption that has governed North American trade for the past 30 years. The United States has always viewed Canada through a lens of geographic determinism. We share the longest undefended border in the world. Our economies are deeply integrated. 75% of Canadian exports flow south to American markets. The assumption in Washington, particularly among protectionist policymakers, has been simple and deeply arrogant. Canada has nowhere else to go. Under this worldview, the United States holds all the cards. If they threaten tariffs, Canada must comply. If they demand concessions on dairy, lumber, or energy, Canada must negotiate from a position of weakness because we are, in their minds, a captive market. This is the logic that drove Trump's recent threats. When he called USMCA irrelevant, he wasn't just being dismissive. He was sending a message. Your prosperity depends on us. We can rewrite the rules anytime we want, and you will accept whatever terms we offer because you have no alternative. But there's a fundamental rule in international relations that bullies often forget. If you treat an ally like a captive, eventually they will escape. And when they do, they will remember how you treated them. Mark Carney's trip to Beijing wasn't scheduled last week in a panic room after Trump's Ford plant speech. The groundwork for these agreements has been in development for months. Teams of Canadian trade negotiators have been working quietly, addressing specific bilateral issues with China, rebuilding trust after years of tension over issues like the Meng Wanzhou case and Huawei. Carney himself confirmed this. He stated that teams have been working for months to address specific issues and to lay the foundation for what he called a new strategic partnership. This language is crucial. A strategic partnership is not a one-time transaction. It is a long-term alternative to dependence. And that word alternative is what has Washington in an absolute panic right now, because the entire foundation of American trade policy toward Canada has been built on the premise that we have no alternatives. Yesterday in Beijing, we proved that premise catastrophically wrong. Let's strip away the diplomatic language and look at exactly what Canada secured in Beijing, because the true brilliance of this move becomes clear when you understand the scope. 8 agreements were signed yesterday covering forestry, wood construction, culture, tourism, pet food safety, and most critically, a comprehensive framework for energy trade and investment. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Pet food safety, tourism agreements? This sounds like ceremonial fluff, diplomatic theater designed to create the appearance of substance, but that would be a profound misreading of what actually happened. Each of these agreements represents a brick in the foundation of an alternative economic architecture. When you're building leverage against a superpower, you don't do it with one dramatic gesture. You do it by creating multiple integration points, multiple areas of mutual dependence, multiple reasons for your new partner to value the relationship. That's what these 8 agreements represent. They are the infrastructure of strategic autonomy. But let's focus on the crown jewel, the agreement that changes everything: energy. Canada and China established a ministerial dialogue to explore opportunities in oil, natural gas, nuclear power, and clean technology. Let that sink in for a moment. Canada has just formalized a pathway to sell its vast energy reserves, the third largest proven oil reserves in the world, to a market of 1.4 billion people who are desperate for stable, reliable energy supplies. Currently, almost all of Canada's natural gas flows south to the United States. We are the largest foreign supplier of energy to America, providing more oil than all OPEC countries combined. The U.S. takes this for granted. They assume Canadian crude will always flow south because where else would it go? The answer arrived yesterday. It will flow west. Canada is building massive LNG export terminals on the Pacific coast. Within 2 years, we will have the infrastructure to ship liquefied natural gas directly to Asian markets. China has now formally recognized Canada as an important potential partner in responsibly produced and reliable global oil, LNG, and LPG supply. This is not symbolic language. This is not diplomatic pleasantries. This is billions of dollars in contracts waiting to be signed. And every barrel that flows to Shanghai is a barrel that doesn't flow to Texas. Every cubic meter of natural gas that powers Chinese industry is a cubic meter that does not heat American homes. Do you understand the leverage this creates? When Trump threatens Canadian energy exports with tariffs or regulatory pressure, Canada can now credibly respond, "Fine, we'll sell to someone who appreciates us." That changes the entire negotiating dynamic. That transforms Canada from a supplicant to an equal, but the energy agreement is only the beginning. The second pillar is investment, and this is where the strategy becomes truly sophisticated. Carney announced that Canada would welcome Chinese investment in sectors including energy, agriculture, and consumer products. He personally met with contemporary Amperex technology, known as CATL, the world's largest electric vehicle battery maker. Now, why does this matter? Because Canada sits on a mountain of critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, graphite, rare earths, that are essential for the battery revolution. The transition to electric vehicles, to renewable energy storage, to the digitization of the global economy, all of it depends on these materials. And China desperately needs them. The United States desperately needs them. But if Chinese companies invest in Canadian mines and processing facilities, they secure preferential access. This creates a fascinating dynamic. The U.S. has been spending billions trying to build domestic supply chains for EV batteries to reduce dependence on China. It's a cornerstone of their national security strategy. But if the raw materials come from Canadian mines, financed by Chinese investment, processed in Canadian facilities built with Chinese capital, the supply chain still runs through Beijing's financial system, just routed through Canadian sovereignty. From Canada's perspective, this is genius. We maintain control over our resources and our territory, but we leverage Chinese capital and market access to develop them. From America's perspective, this is a nightmare. They're watching their most important ally create the exact supply chain vulnerabilities they've been spending billions to avoid. The third major component of yesterday's agreements involves agriculture. Now, the canola dispute between Canada and China remains technically unresolved. This has been a major irritant in the relationship, costing Canadian farmers hundreds of millions of dollars. But the framework established yesterday creates a pathway to resolution. Canada is one of the world's largest canola producers, and China is one of the largest consumers. If this dispute is resolved, and yesterday's meeting suggests it will be, it could unlock billions in annual trade. More importantly, it signals that both sides are committed to removing obstacles, not creating new ones. The remaining 5 agreements, covering tourism, culture, forestry, wood construction, and yes, even pet food safety standards, might seem trivial on the surface, but they're not. They signal normalization. They signal that Canada and China are building a comprehensive economic relationship, not just transactional commodity trades. When you have agreements on cultural exchanges and tourism, you're building people-to-people connections. When you have forestry and construction standards alignment, you're integrating industrial supply chains. These are the connective tissues of a deep, resilient economic partnership. The message to Washington is unmistakable. You are not our only option. We have alternatives. And if you force us to choose, we will choose stability over chaos. We will choose partners who negotiate in good faith over bullies who govern by tweet. Now, here is where the strategic brilliance becomes undeniable. Let's examine the timeline, because the sequence of events tells a story that completely contradicts the narrative coming out of Washington. January 7th, Trump demands Congress increase defense spending to $1.5 trillion, signaling an aggressive, militaristic approach to foreign policy. This wasn't just about defense. This was a statement of intent. This was Trump announcing that America First would be enforced with economic and military coercion. January 13th. Trump visits the Ford plant in Michigan and declares USMCA irrelevant, directly threatening Canada's economic security. He specifically said, America doesn't need Canadian manufacturing, doesn't need Canadian products. This was meant to be a humiliation, a public reminder of who holds power in North America. January 15th. Carney is in Beijing, smiling, shaking hands, signing agreements with Chinese officials. Now, the administration in Washington wants you to believe these events are unrelated. They want you to think Canada panicked after Trump's threats and desperately ran to China seeking rescue. They want to portray this as weakness, as Canada being so frightened by American power that we threw ourselves into the arms of an authoritarian regime. But remember what Carney said, and this is crucial. These agreements took months to negotiate. The meetings were scheduled weeks in advance. The legal frameworks were drafted by teams of lawyers over the course of 2025. You don't organize a state visit by a prime minister. You don't negotiate 8 separate bilateral agreements. You don't establish ministerial dialogues in a matter of days. These things take months of preparation. What actually happened is this, and I want you to really understand the sophistication of what Canadian strategists pulled off here. Canada saw Trump's return to power coming. It wasn't a surprise. We knew he would revert to his protectionist instincts, that he would threaten trade, that he would try to bully Canada into submission. We'd seen this movie before during his first term, so Canadian foreign policy professionals, diplomats, trade negotiators began quietly building the alternative. We rebuilt diplomatic relations with China that had been strained during the Trudeau years. We addressed the contentious issues, the Huawei ban, the detained Canadians, the canola dispute. We didn't resolve all of them, but we created enough goodwill to begin serious economic talks. We laid the groundwork for comprehensive agreements, and then we waited. We waited for Trump to show his hand. We waited for him to make his threats public, to commit himself to a position, to back himself into a corner with his own rhetoric. And the moment he called our trade relationship irrelevant, the moment he said America doesn't need Canada, we revealed that we had already made ourselves relevant to someone else. We revealed that while he was campaigning and tweeting, we were in Beijing negotiating. This is not desperation. This is preparation. This is the difference between reacting and anticipating. This is what it looks like when a serious country plays the long game. The fury in Washington right now, and make no mistake, there is absolute fury, stems from the realization that they have lost their primary point of leverage. Leverage in international relations is fundamentally about alternatives. When you can threaten someone's livelihood and they have no other options, you control them, you can dictate terms, you can extract concessions. But when that person or that country has already secured an alternative income stream, your threats become hollow. They become background noise. That's what happened yesterday. Trump's threats, which were supposed to bring Canada to the negotiating table in a position of weakness, have instead been revealed as empty bluster. Because Canada can now credibly walk away. We have another customer for our energy. We have another source of investment capital. We have another massive market for our agriculture and resources. That doesn't mean we want to walk away from the American relationship. That relationship is still enormously important. But it does mean that relationship is now voluntary, not compulsory, and that changes everything. Let's be clear-eyed about what this means for the balance of power in North America and beyond, because the implications of yesterday's agreements extend far beyond bilateral trade statistics. For decades, the United States has operated under the assumption that it is the indispensable nation in the Western Hemisphere. Canada and Mexico are junior partners, whose prosperity depends entirely on access to American markets. This assumption has allowed Washington to dictate terms, to impose tariffs at will, to rewrite trade agreements unilaterally, and to treat its neighbors not as allies, but as economic colonies. That assumption died yesterday in Beijing. When Canada signs a comprehensive strategic partnership with China, it fundamentally alters the negotiating dynamic with the United States. America can no longer assume compliance. They can no longer issue ultimatums and expect submission. Because now, Canada can walk away. Now Canada has options. And in the brutal calculus of international relations, options are power. This doesn't mean we're abandoning our relationship with the United States. That would be neither possible nor desirable. Our economies are intertwined at a level that cannot be quickly undone. Millions of jobs on both sides of the border depend on cross-border trade. Supply chains, built over decades, don't simply disappear overnight. But what it does mean is that the relationship is now voluntary, not compulsory. Canada is choosing to maintain the relationship, but we're doing so on terms that reflect mutual respect, not American dominance. Consider the energy sector specifically, because this is where the leverage is most tangible and most immediate. For decades, Canadian energy producers have sold primarily to American markets because that was the path of least resistance. Pipelines ran north to south. Refineries were configured to process Canadian heavy crude. The entire infrastructure of the energy industry was built around American consumption. If the U.S. imposes punitive tariffs on Canadian oil, if they demand we sell at below market prices, if they use regulatory pressure to disadvantage Canadian producers, we now have the option to redirect supply to Asia. The infrastructure is being built. LNG Canada, a massive export terminal in British Columbia, will begin operations soon. Other projects are in development. The customer is waiting in China. The contracts can be signed. This is leverage. Real, tangible leverage. Not the leverage of threats, but the leverage of alternatives. And here's the irony that should absolutely terrify American policymakers, and I genuinely mean terrify, because the implications are staggering. By pushing Canada toward China, by treating us as a captive market to be exploited rather than an ally to be respected, the United States is doing Beijing's work for them. Washington has spent years and billions of dollars trying to decouple from China. The entire premise of their Indo-Pacific strategy, their reshoring initiatives, their CHIPS Act, all of it is designed to reduce American dependence on Chinese supply chains and Chinese manufacturing. The cornerstone of that strategy was supposed to be building secure North American supply chains for critical minerals, for energy, for manufacturing. The idea was that the United States, Canada, and Mexico would form an integrated economic bloc capable of competing with China without depending on Chinese resources or markets. But if Canada, the holder of those critical minerals and energy reserves, is now in a strategic partnership with China, the decoupling fails. You cannot build Fortress North America if the Northern Wall has opened a gate to your rival. This is a self-inflicted wound of absolutely staggering proportions. The United States had a willing, democratic, stable ally sitting on a treasure trove of resources. All they had to do was treat us with respect. All they had to do was negotiate in good faith, honor the agreements they signed, and refrain from threatening our economy every time they wanted a domestic political win. Instead, they chose bullying. They chose threats. They chose to treat Canada as a problem to be solved rather than a partner to be valued. And now they are watching Canadian resources, Canadian energy, Canadian critical minerals beginning to flow west to Shanghai instead of south to Detroit. They are watching Chinese investment flow north into Canadian mines and factories. They are watching the very supply chain security they were trying to build evaporate before their eyes. And the worst part, from their perspective, is that they have no one to blame but themselves. I want to pause here for a moment because this story is not just about trade statistics and diplomatic strategy and geopolitical chess. It is fundamentally about the Canadian character, about who we are as a nation and how we operate on the world stage. For generations, we have been stereotyped, both by others and sometimes by ourselves, as the polite neighbor, the apologetic middle power, the country that prefers compromise over confrontation. And there is truth in that characterization. We do value diplomacy. We do prefer negotiation to threats. We do believe in multilateralism and rule-based international order. These are not weaknesses. These are strategic choices rooted in our history and our values. But there's a profound difference between being polite and being weak. There's a difference between preferring peace and being incapable of defending your interests. And what we saw in Beijing yesterday was the revelation that Canada has a steel spine when necessary. We have the capacity for strategic patience, for long-term planning, for quiet preparation that yields decisive results. When Trump called our trade relationship irrelevant, we didn't beg for reconsideration. We didn't offer immediate concessions. We didn't panic and scramble to appease American anger. We calmly boarded a plane to Beijing and demonstrated that if you consider us irrelevant, we will find someone who doesn't. If you don't value our partnership, we will find partners who do. This is the patience of a strategic thinker. This is the discipline of a nation that understands that power in the 21st century is not about who shouts the loudest or who makes the most dramatic threats. It's about who has the most options. It's about who has done the homework, built the relationships, created the alternatives. And Canada has been doing that work quietly, methodically, without fanfare or dramatic announcements, while the United States was distracted by its own internal chaos. We have options because of our geography. We are blessed with the world's longest coastline touching 3 oceans. That's not just a tourist slogan. That's strategic positioning. It means we can ship to Europe through the Atlantic, to Asia through the Pacific, and increasingly through the Arctic. We are not landlocked. We are not dependent on any single trade route or any single partner for market access. We have options because of our resources. We have 20% of the world's fresh water. We have vast reserves of critical minerals. We have some of the most fertile agricultural land on the planet. We have massive energy reserves. And we have stable institutions and a global reputation for reliability. These are not abstract advantages. These are concrete sources of leverage in a world that is becoming increasingly unstable and resource constrained. The United States assumed that because we are smaller in population, because our economy is smaller, we are weaker. They forgot that in a global economy, size is less important than positioning. And Canada is positioned perfectly between the 2 largest economies on Earth, the United States and China. We don't have to choose one over the other exclusively. We can engage with both. And by doing so, we ensure that neither can take us for granted. Neither can issue threats with impunity. Neither can simply dictate terms and expect compliance. This is the essence of middle power strategy, executed at the highest level. We are not trying to be a superpower. We don't have ambitions to dominate our hemisphere or project military force globally, but we can be a strategic player, a country that other nations need to court, to negotiate with seriously, to treat with respect. That's what yesterday's agreements represent. They represent Canada stepping fully into that role. Friends, as we close, I want you to understand that what happened in Beijing yesterday is not an isolated event. It is not a one-time reaction to Trump's threats. It is the beginning of a new chapter in Canadian history, a chapter that has actually been unfolding for several years, but is only now becoming visible to those paying attention. The post-World War II order, where American economic dominance was unquestioned and Canadian prosperity depended fundamentally on American approval, is ending. It's not ending because we chose to end it out of hostility or resentment. It's ending because the United States, through its own policies, through its own choices, is making that arrangement untenable. When your largest trading partner becomes unpredictable, when they change the rules via social media post, when they threaten your economy for domestic political gain, you have no choice but to diversify. It's not about wanting to, it's about having to, as a matter of national survival. We are watching Canada diversify in real time. The China agreements are part of a broader pattern that extends beyond Asia. We are deepening ties with Europe. The Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, is already in force. We are strengthening Commonwealth relationships, particularly with the United Kingdom post-Brexit and with Australia. We are building the infrastructure, the ports, the pipelines, the rail lines, the trade agreements to operate as a truly global player. This is not anti-American. I want to be absolutely clear about that because there will be voices in Washington who try to portray Canada as diversification, as hostility, as betrayal, as choosing sides against America. That is not what this is. This is pro-Canadian. It is the recognition that in a volatile world, dependence on any single partner, no matter how powerful, no matter how historically friendly, is a vulnerability. It is the recognition that a mature, sovereign nation must have options. The fury from Washington will continue. There will be more threats, there will be more bluster, there will be angry tweets and cable news segments questioning Canadian loyalty, but the leverage they once had is evaporating. And the longer they maintain their hostile posture, the longer they refuse to treat Canada as an equal partner, the deeper our ties with alternative partners will become. Every month of American hostility is another month of Canadian diplomats in Beijing, in Brussels, in London, in Delhi, building relationships that will outlast any single American administration. Mark Carney said something revealing yesterday that I think captures the moment perfectly. He said Canada is entering a new era of relations with China, but the deeper truth is that Canada is entering a new era, period. An era where we stand on our own 2 feet, an era where we leverage our geography, our resources, and our values to secure our prosperity on our own terms, an era where we are respected because we have options, because we have alternatives, because we cannot be bullied. This is the Canada that your generation fought to build. This is the Canada that repatriated its constitution, that stood firm during the free trade debates, that built a social safety net and universal health care despite American skepticism. This is a sovereign nation that respects its neighbors but refuses to be dominated by them, a nation that prepares quietly and moves decisively, a nation that plays the long game. Trump's threats will fade. His administration, like all administrations, will eventually leave office. But the strategic partnerships Canada is building right now, the infrastructure we're investing in, the relationships we're deepening, these will last for decades. This is how you win in geopolitics, not with loud threats, not with dramatic gestures, but with quiet preparation, with patient strategy, with the discipline to build alternatives before you need them. So I ask you, do you believe this China pivot was the right move for Canada? Are we better off diversifying away from American dependence, or should we have tried harder to accommodate Washington's demands? Should we have been more conciliatory, more willing to accept American terms to preserve the relationship? Or is this strategic autonomy, this insistence on being treated as an equal, the right path forward? I genuinely want to know your perspective because this community represents decades of wisdom and experience. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me where you stand on this fundamental question about Canada's future. And if you found this analysis valuable, if you appreciate the depth and the context we bring to these critical issues, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We're covering these seismic shifts in Canadian sovereignty and global power dynamics every single day, and your support allows us to continue bringing you the truth behind the headlines, the strategy behind the news, the reality that the mainstream media often misses or misunderstands. Friends, thank you for being here today. Canada is winning. Not because we sought conflict, not because we chose confrontation, but because we prepared, because we were patient, because we understood that power in the modern world comes from having options. And that preparation, that strategic patience, is about to pay dividends for generations to come. Thank you.